Okay, so this is the segue from Purim to Pesach. This is the as we mentioned before in the past, that Purim are the glasses that we put on so that our vision has been enhanced by the time we get to the Seder. What we're trying to achieve by the Seder, Pesach obviously is for the most part a farce. I hate to say it, but it has come down. So this is Mon Jul, and it has come down to basically the cleaning and getting everything ready for the Seder, and then basically Teyulim. After that, just surviving it, getting the stuff taken up, put away, But how many people actually feel the opportunity of cherus, of freedom, on Purim that it's supposed to offer? They don't really feel much spiritually different after as you do going in. If anything, me included as well, that the biggest struggle I have basically is to stay awake through the Seder and try and get the most I can out of it. I'll fall asleep from all the wine that you drink. It's almost like it's a tough situation because you come in very tired and you drink, you try and Chazal dafke by wine as opposed to grape juice if you can handle it, so the wine itself combined together, you're fighting against sleep the entire time. Where's the freedom? And this is like an opening. It's like basically seeing the train leave to freedom, but you've been drugged and you can't get yourself to walk fast enough to catch up to the train, just watch you take off without you inside of it. This is what Pesach has for the most part become. So Purim came along to try to jumpstart our Pesach. That's what Purim is all about. It's the threshold, it's the window, it's the glasses, it's a magnifying glass, whatever you want. But basically, you had to come at a point. It's not Mesuyam, it's not a holiday that came and went. This is why Chazal Dafka, as we mentioned before, that they made it that even in a leap year where you have this unusual situation where you could have Purim in the first month and Adar Rishon, you push it off Adar Sheni because of Mesamchen Gula Gula. Because it has to be that way. You need the Gula of Purim to be able to get to the Gula of Pesach. So if you miss Purim, if you miss Purim, you miss Pesach. But you're not gonna be able to get it to Pesach has to offer. So what to do about it? So the reason why it's an important question, because we see historically that if we don't do something about it, basically it's done to us. That it's either, as Rav Noach used to say, it's either program or pogrom. Either we do something to actively change the situation and maximize whatever it has to give to us, or it's done to us or through us. History is going to run its course, and we can ignore it all we want, and we can try to just basically fight for the status quo and keep things the way they are because it's comfortable. But eventually, Kodesh Baruch Hu's time clock, it overruns our time clock. History has destiny built into it, and it will go its course. So we're either going to be part of that and be a maker, a macher, and make it happen, and actively participate in the process, or become a victim of it. And unfortunately, over history, most people become victims of it. And you just have to isolate primarily what the theme, the message, what it is that we're trying to get out of it and come away with. So just to point out again and reiterate, because now it becomes a segue to the Pesach, but one of the reasons why the story, the Megillah, is so exciting and so much fun is because basically it's like a child's book for the most part. You look at the Megillah, read the Megillah, it's not a serious history book at all. I mean, it's almost, we enjoy it because we make fun of the entire thing. I mean, I watched, for example, on this Purim, like every Purim, when you get to the Haman names, basically the last time when it says the Haman's, they hung, Haman, and of course, basically people are dancing around, making all kinds of noise, and we're all like doing groggers and all that. It's a joke. The whole thing is basically a joke because we win. We know that we win. And not only do we know that we win, but we also know that we make a laughing stock out of Haman. The guy is like, literally a buffoon for the most part. Achashverosh is portrayed as a buffoon as well. And, we like that. It's like a kid's tale, There's a lack of seriousness. Of course, with the fact that we know what happened, we probably would think the whole thing is a fable. Not even exactly accurate. I'm sure that many people do. That people less informed, or less connected, maybe think the story's been embellished and written out of context, and it's not really exactly what happened, and it didn't even happen at all according to some people. The timing, this thing, the whole thing. But for Orthodox Jews, people who read the Megillah and they go through Purim, we know it's a true story, but the story itself is so bizarre and so ludicrous, right? So it reminds me very much of the whole thing with Korach in the Chumash. Because, you look at the story of Korach battling Moshe Rabbeinu, the first question that comes to your mind is, how could he possibly have done that? And the bigger question is, how did he get 250 people, Chashuvim, people of Sanhedrin, people who are supposed to be leaders of the Jewish people, to join with him? Okay, so they had all kinds of gimmicks and PR ploys and things like that to buy, probably went around kissing the babies and shaking hands and making all kinds of promises. If he's elected, he's going to get this, going to get that, whatever he used. But he influenced a lot of people, and even more amazing is that even the people he didn't directly influence, who didn't go with them, stood back on the sidelines to see what was going to happen. So the famous story of this Rebbe who once said he was a Gilgul of Yaakov Avinu's sheep, and then became back as Dorodeya. And so one of his Chassidim eventually asked him, said, Rebbe, you're there watching Korach and Moshe battle it out. Who did you side with? And the famous answer was, we didn't choose. We had to see who was going to win. And that shocks everybody, because what are you talking about? Moshe Rabbeinu versus Korach. Korach is a Russia. Yeah, it was a Russia. Moshe Rabbeinu is the leader of the Jewish people, handpicked by Kosh Baruch Hu, performing all kinds of fantastic miracles. So, what's the shara? How could you possibly be duped in a situation like that? Lesser people, they could make that mistake, but the rest of us, and if I was there, of course, I would have got, Moshe, let's get rid of this Korach guy, throw him out, and maybe even assassinate him, whatever we got to do, get rid of this bad guy. That's right. And then you forget the fact that the Torah basically is Kosh Baruch Hu's perspective. He's telling you history the way it appears to him, not the way it would appear to you had you been there. Everything is different if you're actually there at the moment, experiencing the entire thing, the actual confusion that you undergo, even with great leaders. You watch machalokas develop between people. Issues come up, and I've seen elections where in the frum community where basically even Gedolim can be disgraced by other people because the issues become so hot, and people who stand behind this one, who stands behind that one, and you lose yourself in the process. And maybe Moshe Rabbeinu up until now was the one, but maybe from this point onward, maybe he's to be replaced, and maybe Korach's the next guy, and maybe all this is a shkacha pratis, the Kosh Baruch Hu rebelling. Who knows? So when the Raglim came back, it was the exact same thing. How could you possibly go with the Meraglim? How could so many people stand behind the Meraglim? Moshe Rabbeinu sent you because Baruch Hu, it's a mitzvah, it's in the Torah, basically. Forget about the fact that we know the conclusion of Kosh Baruch Hu's response to it. How could they be so shocked when Hashem says, you rejected Eretz Israel, you're rejecting me, I'm going to destroy you all, and they all go, no, we changed our mind, sorry, we thought it was a mitzvah to do all this stuff over here, now we see it's in the Vera, we want to go. Moshe says, that door is closed. And he's like, what were you thinking? What were you thinking again? So basically, what the Torah is telling you, and that's what
you see with the people. You see it more clearly with the Meraglim, because as the Meraglim were speaking, the people were voicing their opinion.
Yeah, and they wanted to stone Yeshua and Kali. Right, exactly. But how, these were the tzaddikim. So the perspective you have to have when you learn the Chumash and Torah.
But it sounds no different than the Arab route. In other words, if they're sitting around waiting, like you're talking about Moshe and Korach, right? They're sitting around waiting who's going to be the winner. How is that any different than the Erev Rav in Mitzrayim?
Oh, so here's the difference. The difference is the Erev Rav know the truth and they instigate the opposites. They know the bottom line. They're much smarter about it. Just like, for example, you see the Amalekis understand the Jewish people, but the Jewish people understand themselves. Hitler and Shmuel understood the Jewish people. When Streicher goes off saying Purim Fest, as they're dragging to hang him, at the Nuremberg trials, and he throws out this term Purim Fest, probably, every German that, was part of the staff understood exactly what he was talking about, and all the Jews are going, what? What do you mean Purim Fest? What is it? Why is he talking about Purim? What's Purim? Newsweek has to say at the bottom, Purim is a Jewish holiday. Like, what is he tying this into? Right? It's unfathomable. It's unfathomable, but that he would even care to go look up Jewish history to find out what Purim is all about. I remember reading an article years ago when they interviewed Saddam Hussein after the first Persian Gulf War in Newsweek, and they had like one of these one-page articles, and I was so surprised to find out how much he identified with Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, why? Who cares? Like, some years later, this is his hero, and he actually, parts of his house he named after him, and it was a big thing by him. And then the most shocking thing of all was to find out, I never heard this before, I never realized this before, that Aseret B'Teves was a holiday for them. It was a joyous, because it was coming on the same time of year. It was a joyous holiday for them because that was the day they broke through the walls, and back in the time when the first base of Mikdash, and for them it was a glorious day. The fast day for us is a glorious day for them, and for us because we remember these things as history goes on. But for them to celebrate until this very day, I thought it was quite remarkable that they should be so tied still to the history of Babylonia going back all that time. But even this guy is probably a secular whatever he is now, but he actually has this connection and identifies with Nebuchadnezzar. It was a real eye opener for me, and that's when I began to realize you got to look deeper into history. Like we just assume that these people don't think about these things. When Truman goes ahead and he knows Devarim, and what's propelling him to stand behind the creation of the Jewish state is because he feels this is the fulfillment of a prophecy in the Torah. He's a believer. How many Jews at the same time didn't believe at all in this prophecy, didn't believe in Torah from Sinai, and certainly gave credibility? It was certainly not the basis for a world power to stand behind a controversial event as the formation of Israel based upon the Chumash. This is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Thousands of years after Har Sinai, because we are so off base. Just like by Purim, for example, we mentioned that the measure of your understanding of Purim is how kadosh the Mishnah appears to you, right? If the Mishnah it seems chol in your mind, and therefore it belongs to the reverse order, right? That you're going to connect up the mitzvahs. See last week's shir, right? But connect up the mitzvahs with the letters of Hashem's name. So the Mishnah would be at the bottom of the totem pole the way we understand it, right? But if you can understand that the Mishnah is kadosh, it's holy, and that's the goal, and what the goal of the Mishnah actually is, then you've turned the nun right side up as we're supposed to. Hafachu, right? It's not turning the nun upside down, but turning right side up. Everything is correct. The same way the Ramban points out that the love your neighbors yourself is a mitzvah of objectivity. You know your objective when you can see, you can love your neighbor equal to yourself. That's what the mitzvah is coming to teach you. That the measure of objectivity is how equally you treat other people around you, right? And that was important by Torah itself. Likewise, the same thing as well. That here by Purim, if you understand that the Chumash is alive and well, and is very much a part of history, because that's not the way we deal with it. We deal with the Torah like this, the reality of Torah. It's in the back room, right? It used to be in the front room when God came, gave Torah to the Jewish people. We're still the Jewish nation. I'm Skula, and we had Eretz Yisrael, and the world realized that we were the chosen people. So then Torah was in the front room. But then after exile and destruction and all these years have gone on, so Torah got pushed to the back room. So we're kind of like believers, but we're like kind of schizo with Torah today. On one hand, we believe in it, and we know it's from Shemaim, but then we see this whole world outside of us, this whole big, huge world, which is so confusing and so secular and even atheistic and agnostic, and scientific. It's like the Torah is not part of that world, even though the Torah is the blueprint for all of that and incorporates all of it, right? So if that's the way you look at Torah itself, so then you're not really connected to Torah. The same way is like when you're reading the Megillah was written in a way specifically that's not the way the Megillah would have been written normally. Normally, for example, you read about the Chashmonaim, what's ever left over from the Megillahs of the Chashmonaim, the era, what they wrote them was historical accounts of what took place. It was serious stuff, and the danger. It wasn't any of this like reading into the minds of the enemy and seeing what he was thinking and seeing how the whole thing builds up like we do in the story of the Megillah. It was basically just like, this is what we saw, this is what we experienced, and here's we're writing it down. And it was history. It was the real stuff. It was the real scary stuff. The same way, for example, anyone writing today about the situation facing the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael with the Palestinians, nobody's writing anything about well, they're setting the situation up, but it's really God bringing up create the downfall of the Palestinian people. This whole thing is happening. We're pushing Ahmadinejad because the whole thing. Why did Esther make two sudas in the end? Because she saw that Haman was on the rise. And as the Gemara says, when a Rasha is on the rise, basically you can't touch him. If you try and touch him, antagonize him, it'll be your own undoing in the end. For whatever reason, not because Kosh Baruch Hu favors him, but he's fulfilling some kind of tafkid. So you can't interfere with that process. So when Esther saw that Haman was on the rise, she realized it wasn't the time to try to change the situation. So what did she do? She expedited the matter by having two sudas and giving him that extra kavod. It pushed him to the top faster. So the moment he got to the top, he was able to go back down again. That's what she's doing. She understood it. Otherwise, who needs two sudas? The one is enough to make the point. Because she saw that at the point that she came to the picture, Haman was still rising. His muzzle was still rising. She pushed him to the top. He peaked, and you see how fast he fell after that, right? So they knew that. As the Gemara questions on several occasions, Haman thought to himself in his heart, how'd they know?
Actually, he peaked at the first suda, right? And he met more than he met.
Well, the first was to make him peak, so the second so he could fall.
Right, but he really fell when he met Mordechai outside on the way home.
Yeah, so that was like the turning point. The turning point. So, but the point is that is that how do they know all these things? So the Gemara itself asked these questions. Haman thought to himself, "Who does a king want to honor more than me?" No, he wasn't speaking out loud. How did he know that? That they should suggest all these things that he should set himself up for this terrible, humiliating situation that's going to result in his daughter committing suicide because she's going to think it's Mordechai pulling Haman on the horse and dump the whole thing. It's a comedy of errors. There's one big comedy of errors. Was it real? Was it real history? Was the Megillah real history? Well, yeah, it was real. But is history that comical? Was it that comical? I mean, the Jewish people were they weren't laughing at the time. They were fasting. They were scared. Even the secular, and there were tons of assimilation. These were tons of secular Jews. This is not like a huge frum community. I don't even know what the proportion was, because we see Ezra later on, after, has to deal with tons of intermarriage. And Amaratzis, the first thing they did when they came back to Israel was learn Chumash again. They had to learn from scratch. They didn't know about Nevi'im. And in 70 short years, they forgot a tremendous amount. It's really not such a short period of time. 70 is a lot of time. Just like, for example, over the last 40, 50 years here, that people have lost connection to traditions and things like that. It happens very quickly.
It seems like the Megillah was like a psychological history as compared to events. In other words,
very much so. Very much so.
It was the psychological aspect behind the events. In other words, the fact that Haman shows up after, he had to go, his wife even told him, wait till the morning to go to see Ahasuerus. Because he was so, he was so
heated up.
He was so heated up because of Mordechai. After being so high, and after experiencing such an elation, after leaving the first Suda, and he meets Mordechai, and he says, how come this one Jew, I have everything in my hands.
Wipe everything out.
And his wife tells him to wait to go till the next morning. He couldn't wait till the next morning. He went that night.
Right.
And why is it that same night
that he couldn't sleep?
The king couldn't sleep.
And they read it.
And otherwise, think about it. If you're the king, Mordechai, and Haman shows up, even Haman shows up in the middle of the night and is disturbing your sleep, you're not going to be too happy with the guy.
No,
right?
but the story is so silly because aside from all that silliness, because it always bothered me because it's like this is the middle of the night, and it seems like it's almost like morning because everyone's like up and doing this stuff like that, and as the Gemara points out, Haman's sons were trying to erase Mordechai's name from the book of Chronicles, and they kept showing up again. It's like, so what does this mean? Did that miracle really happen the way it happened? Well, you just assume that it did, because we're not going to start second guessing Chazal, things are going to say. But the point is that this whole story, what is it? Why? Is it just meant to? It's all is it a mashal? Is it only if it's a mashal, then you have Rishus to say and do whatever you want in the end. You can just write whatever you want. But if it's real history, so why not record it as real history and put the fear of the enemy in the Jewish people? Let's read the story and fear Haman. Let's see how because maybe if we did, we would have feared Hitler. Taking him more seriously and never give him the chance to rise to power the way that he did, or at least not be around when he did. In the end, get out faster. We didn't take him serious in the end. So, what is it doing? What is it telling us? So the truth is, this.
You don't think we feared? You don't think we feared?
We don't. They did in their time, but we don't today. When we read the story, we don't take Haman seriously at all. Not even at all. He was a barber, cut the hair.
Because we know the story. That's why we know the story. But
right.
They were living through it at that time.
100%. So, but if it was as comical as it seems to us, it would have to have been as comical back then as well. Mordechai could have walked around and said, "This guy was my barber." When they saw Mordechai on the horse being pulled by Haman at a time like this, when Haman was making everyone bow down and Mordechai wasn't doing it, there was already gezer against the Jewish people, and this thing's happening. This is funny. Everyone should come out and crowded around to watch this thing and wonder what's going on over here. But they weren't doing that. So the Megillah, the reality of the Megillah was that if you had been living at that time, it would have looked like Hitler rising to power, rising to power and passing decrees and a very scary time, because that was the real history. The Megillah basically is trying to provide a path and a key to Geula and redemption. And it's trying to give you a taste of what history looks like from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's perspective. As the Gemara points out, for example, that a Kodesh Baruch Hu never inflicts the Jewish people with anything without first making them refuah. On an individual level and on a national level, the only trouble is sometimes the refuah is not exactly on the terms we want it to be. It could happen over a lifetime, for example. A person can suffer in this world and then have 3 Gilgulim later on come back and have a much easier life because they've gone through all the tikkun. It's not necessarily always in one lifetime. As the Rizal points out, that mitzvah gored mitzvah and avera gored avera can actually be over lifetimes. The mitzvah you do in this lifetime may not come back to you until 2 lifetimes from now, not always in the same lifetime. And likewise, in avera, the person does in the previous Gilgul can actually have an impact, 2, 3 Gilgulim later in the end. But it's all attached. It's all connected. And the point of the Megillah was, where does freedom really lie? Well, answer the question by explaining where.
You made a statement that the Megillah is showing history from God's perspective.
Yeah, that's what I say.
So how do you I don't understand what you mean?
Because this is what God was doing. Everything that happened, the same way, the same way that was a good mashal in life. I mean, there's all kinds of mashals in life for things like this, but the point of the Megillah, this was the only reason why we read the Megillah the way we do is because God let us in on what He was doing behind the scenes. That's what the Gemara is saying. How did they know these things, right? If they had not gotten Ruach HaKodesh, which means Hashem was telling them things they wouldn't have known on their own. If they had not been privy to information about the whole setup of how it started from scratch to get to where to the final conclusion, the Megillah would only been a historical account about how scary the situation was. Just like the same way we read about the Holocaust today, where you have someone rise to power, because it's the exact same thing. You look at Hitler's rise to power; it was ridiculous. The man was unqualified. He shouldn't have been there. He was an anti-Semite from the very beginning. He lit the Reichstag on fire purposely just in order to be able to convince the people they needed a stronger person in government. We're talking about one of the most. These are questions that come up. One of the most intelligent societies in history at that time, to be able to allow someone like this to come into power and run the country the way that he did, and rearm the Germans, the German people at a time that was completely against the will of the world, and start going to war, take over countries, and eventually start the Holocaust. I mean, the whole thing is completely ludicrous. But in retrospect, we just look back at it as history, because you can't argue with history. It happened. It happened. But if a Kosh Baruch Hu were to give you Ruach HaKodesh and to show you, I mean, here unfortunately we lost 6 million Jews, so it's not the same story. In the Megillah, we came close to losing everybody, but everyone survived. That's why it's such a happy ending. We got close to extermination, but it didn't actually happen in the end, because it was a Mordechai. That's the whole thing. Had there not been a Mordechai, what happened in the Holocaust would have happened back there instead. And all through history, for that matter. And it has. That's the missing factor every time. Because Mordechai was somebody who was able to rise above the mundane perspective of looking at history and reality, rather than sit at home and shaking his boots. They ask the same question, for example, but he was the antidote. He was the refuah. But
he's the antidote to a moment.
But there's one in every generation. There's supposed to be one in every generation.
There was one during the Holocaust.
Yeah, the Ra brings down. There's always in every generation. There's a Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. Always, there always is there. Question is whether we're zeicha to them, whether they rise to the occasion. But there's not one generation where that's not the case. That's why there's a potential gula in every generation. They're there to make it, to bring it about. But what was I going to say?
It wasn't from Mordechai.
Yeah, there's one point just before that, or just after that. Was this thing? I have to come back. But so that was Mordechai's ability. Mordechai's ability was he was able to see history more from Kosh Baruch Hu's perspective, and as a result of that, he could look at the events from Kosh Baruch Hu's, for the way he was seeing it, and that's what made him immune. Because ultimately speaking, how are we enslaved? Today, for example, right? What enslaves us the most, right? We're enslaved by Ahmadinejad, right? Because he's a real threat. Will they have a nuclear bomb? Will they not have a nuclear bomb? Will Israel go and attack, and if they attack them, it's going to start World War III and bring upon a nuclear holocaust? These guys will go off to their underground shelters and hopefully be protected from it. What about the rest of us, right? And if we start the war, what will the rest of the world do? They're all going to march to Jerusalem and try to wrestle control away from the Jewish people. We have all these scenarios in our mind where things are going, and the truth is we have no answer. We have no clear vision of what's going to happen. History is very scary to us, so therefore it's very enslaving. It's very enslaving. We're captured, right? We're locked into it because we don't see a way out, and we don't possess the power to be able to change the situation miraculously. We don't have a staff in our hand with the name of a Kodesh Baruch Hu on it that we can use to fend off the enemy. We can't perform miracles like splitting the sea. We're just sort of like trapped in that situation. We go about our lives, We do whatever we can, and the way that we deal with reality is basically by ignoring it, and we have no choice but to confront it head on because it's chasing after us. So we end up being enslaved. Whereas Mordechai was totally unenslaved, evident by the fact that even though he was going through the motions of putting on sack va'afer and sitting by the king's gate and everything he was doing, but Lemaisa, he would go out of his way, walk in the path of Haman, and not be affected by it. Moshe could walk into Paro's court, say, let my people go. Here comes another plague. And Paro put all these wild animals, these man-eating animals inside his chutzner. And he did everything he could to possibly stop Moshe Benu. But Moshe was able to come and go as he pleased. So where does that come from? That's freedom. That's when he controlled the situation. Right? That's total rising above the everyday reality. The only reason why Moshe was stuck, because getting the rest of the nation to get to that level was another story. Mordechai's problem too. Mordechai would never have experienced Haman if it wasn't for the rest of the people. So Mordechai was a shaliach to try to elevate the rest of the nation to the level of freedom that he was living on and living with, because he wasn't dragged down by everyday hashgacha. The hashgacha that the people live with were basically they empower the enemies, they empower things that can stand in their way, and they don't see the hand of Hakadosh Baruch Hu behind everything, and they certainly don't believe in the refuah before the makkah. A Jew really has no reason to get depressed, ultimately speaking. The Reb Chaim Vital brings down that depression is just a function of the chitzoni. Any depression we experience in life is a function of the chitzoni, meaning that it was a certain yeush that came because we allowed the spirit of tumah to overcome us and block our clarity. But ultimately speaking, the Jewish people have this promise from Hakadosh Baruch Hu for every crisis that we're going to face in life, the refuah already exists. The fact that we can't see the solution, the fact that we can't connect, the fact that we can't relate to it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's there. By definition, it has to exist. Mordechai understood that, and that's what he says to Esther. He says, for all you know, this is the reason why you're here. You got here, and every time I read that, I think to myself, what do you mean? He should be saying, this is the reason why you're here. What are you talking about? This is why you're here. You were obviously put here for this specific reason. Where's the suffix involved? That maybe this is why you're here. Because he's butting together what history looked like, what history actually was at the same time. He brought, there was no way to know for sure at that time because she went to the channels to become the queen and everything was set up, normally. And so it wasn't clear at that point in time, but Mordechai suspected because he was able to see history from Hakadosh Baruch Hu's perspective.
Not just that he saw that he was able to read the signs. In other words, every sign he was able to see not from a perspective of fear, but like you're saying, from this free perspective, from this not when a person has this fear, he closes down. He never closed down. He was totally aware that whatever occurred, it was a simon from God. Like for instance, here, like we talked about this, but he was the basula. Remember we talked about? She would forget about the fact that one of the criteria we said that that Achashverosh after Vashti was disposed of wanted all the basulas in the country. Now, if she was married to Mordechai, she certainly wasn't a basula, but she was taken to and not only that, but compounding the fact that never identified where she was from, right? And nobody ever said, "Oh, she's a Jew." None of the other Jews, like the Malshinim, you didn't have any nice Malshinim like Dustin and Aviram would go and say, knock on the door. You say, "Listen, I want to get high up in your cabinet. I know who that lady is. Why don't you give me a better job?
Right.
I mean, so the fact remains that if she was a basula, at this point, that in and of itself, he saw that she was taken. Mamish, the sign. What kind of a sign is this? God, if I'm reading you correctly,
100%. That's what Mordechai was doing.
He saw this mama. He says, had to be Yad Hashem. Taking a woman who was a married woman, he's taking her to the.
Something was up.
Right.
That's what Mordechai. Everybody else is going with their life. They see these things happening, but they go fight it. They just deal with life like it's just a random thing.
He responded instead of reacted. Every chance he
because he understood this is what Hakadosh Baruch Hu bringing about a certain conclusion. He knew, and he says to Esther, the gul, if it doesn't come to you, it's going to come from someplace else, but it's going to come. That's exactly what Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Don't forget, there's the 70 years. We've been in exile now for 2,000 years. It was predicted we'd be there for a couple of thousand years. And then it says in the Chumash, just take a step back for a second, right? It was predicted, and the Chumash says that you'll go through all these terrible things, right? And then the Chumash implies you'll still survive because we're still talking, it doesn't say, and you'll disappear. And this will become irrelevant because anyhow, there'll be nobody here to read it. It doesn't say that. is that you go through all these things, and then I'm going to remember the land and bring you back and do all these things 2,000 years later. How do you know we'll even be around? Nobody else has been around to go through what we've gone through after exile and destruction and assimilation and intermarriage, and to make a promise that you're going to come back to the land and rebuild it again. I mean, this is phenomenal prophecy. This is phenomenal fulfillment of prophecy on such a phenomenal scale that this is bigger than discovering the basis of the Big Bang and how creation came into existence and everything else that people are fascinated by and blown away. But this is phenomenal history, and that a president should be in power after World War II at that specific time, who's a Bible-carrying president who believes in Devarim, and he makes a statement against the State Department, and it's like, things are happening. And then you look at the success of this country, building it up from scratch. Talk about fighting with a sword in one hand and a brick in the other hand, okay? This country's been doing it, and yet it's like impervious. I mean, we lost people along the way for sure. There's still a Tevitic thing, because if we lost nobody in battle, that's already way too obvious, okay? Still some kind of free will has to exist. And this is like every Jew should be going, we should gotta get back to as fast as possible.
Sounds like you're writing a contemporary Purim story.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it is. And that's exactly the point. And that's exactly what Pesach comes to tell you. The freedom doesn't come from a Kodesh Baruch Hu coming down and say, hi, the mask is all gone, I'm revealing myself, all these guys were plastic soldiers in the first place, this is the real world, let me show you how to get back home. That's way after the fact, that's your Muslim Mashiach. That's not going to earn you scar in the world to come. That's already getting the answers for the test after the test has been handed in and collected and marked already. What did you accomplish in the end? But freedom comes from rising. It's a level of hashgacha pratis. So the actual cheruz that Pesach, you actually create cheruz by leaving the mundane reality of everyday hashgacha, really what they call hashgacha klalis. Because we live today, we have the opportunity to live with hashgacha pratis. But we live instead with the shkacha klalis. We have, you live like Esau, you die like Esau. We're living an Esav type reality, where they also believe in God. So the Pope, they also believe in God. They also believe in grace and divine providence and all kinds of things like that. But they're way off in terms of understanding how the thing actually works. There's a lack of sophistication because we got the book that tells us how to do it. Because the actual course, the path to freedom, is determined by the level of hashgacha pratis that you live with. How much you're able to see history from God's perspective as opposed to from your own perspective, from everyday perspective, from man's perspective, from the newspaper's perspective, from the government's perspective, from your neighbor's perspective, from your parents' perspective. All the people are yelling, "What are you crazy? Living in the Middle East at this stage of history? What are you crazy? Learning as opposed to back here in business where you can make much more money. You have to put up with the situation. One after that, everybody basically telling you that what you're doing goes against what's normal and natural. Those are two words that don't apply to Klal Yisrael. Normal and natural. That's what the Megillah came to tell you. There's no such thing as normal and natural. It's not a comedy. The Megillah wasn't a comedy. It just looks like a comedy. It's like, as we say in Shir Malos, right? Haynu kechomi. Schach pinu, right? There'll be laughter in our mouth, and we'll be like dreamers. What does it mean laughter in our mouth will be like dreamers? We'll look back, and we're going to see how things were happening in history that we're totally oblivious to the entire time. Totally oblivious. And we just saw things evolve. Well, that was a close call. That wasn't a close call. Because Baruch Hu said it from the beginning that thing should be there exactly when you had to be there for that thing to happen to save your life, because that was set up way before you were born in the end. The Gemara tells you before a person's born, a bas kol comes out, Ben Ploni, will marry bas Ploni, gets Sadeh Ploni. It's all set up from the beginning. Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and this is the most important point of all, it's not even about this world. Kodesh Baruch Hu is taking us to the world to come. Every single Jew has to go to the world to come. We're on the path to the world to come. This world is just a vehicle, it's a prose door. That's why suffering for the Jew is not called suffering, it's called Yisurim. Yisurim is from the word Musar. Everything that a Jew goes in this world is just to make him better. It's just to refine his life. It's to make him more of a Ben Olam Haba than he was before. Whatever you don't fix up in this world, so there's even Gehenna after. We're scared of Gehenna. But you know something? If it wasn't for Gehenna, you wouldn't know the world to come. A person would go, people who are not shaykh to the world to come don't go to Gehenna. People not shaykh to Gehenna don't go to the world to come. We go to the world to come because we have Gehenna. And we go to Gehenna because we're the world to come. It's part and parcel of the same idea. Because the goal is to get there. Because the goal is to get there, we have to go through whatever purification process we have to go through. And likewise, not just on that side of history, after 6,000, but on this side of 6,000 as well. Everything Kosh Baruch Hu is doing for Klal Yisrael is for the sake of getting us to the final destination. Nobody will be left out in the end. Even the worst of the worst, as the lesson points out, Achav, Yeravam, people who literally we thought that's the end of they're finished. They'll never get another chance. They blew it so badly. No. They will go through Gehenna. They will go through whatever they have to. They may be the last ones out to turn the lights off in the end, but they'll get to the will to come, because every neshama, every Jewish neshama gets the will to come in the end. So by definition, there has to be a geula for a Jew at some point in time. But if you want to experience that geula in this world, you cannot be a part of this world. You have to rise above it. Everything, even the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust itself, which was a terrible, terrible experience and has been understood at whatever level that it took place on. There's obviously not to downplay in any way, but people survived the Holocaust in conditions that nobody else could have. The Jewish people, anybody else would have eaten what we ate for months on end and years on end, and to work in the cold and terrible conditions that literally so inhumane. I mean, they pushed it to the point of hoping probably would die earlier in the end. But somehow people survived, even came out of the war after it. Sleeping in barracks, I mean, I just thinking the other day, after Purim, as I was literally sitting down on this comfortable sofa and stretching out, just like with a safer in my hand and relaxing. Just the image came to my mind of all these people in the same freezing cold bunk with no heat and wearing the same striped clothing, and skinny and on the verge of death, and not knowing one aspect of comfort any day of the week, any moment of the day, until probably they finally died. For years on end, and they still survived it. That's how L'malam Teva the Jewish people are. That's an extreme we had to get to be able to realize that we're not really part of this world. We got damaged to the point because they're able to do what they're able to do to us, because basically we forgot who we were.
Would you say then that the people who survived the Holocaust actually went through a geula?
Absolutely.
That's like a steer.
It's a steer in as much as because they came out. If the lessons of the Holocaust had been possible to be able to absorb at the time itself, we weren't zeicher to that. The Holocaust was meant to be the threshold to the final redemption. There's no question about that. It was meant to be the threshold we cross over. It was the last thing the Jewish people should have gone through. We didn't deal with it properly. We didn't. I mean, it was hard to do so, whatever the hashgacha was, but we didn't get out of the Holocaust. In the end, rather than confronting issues and trying to understand what the message was, we shut down completely. Understandably so. There's not pointing finger at anybody whatsoever.
So
but
on an experiential level, they went through a geula, but on an intellectual level, and a spiritual level, they didn't.
Yeah, the same way the same stira takes place every day in life. By the way, as Kabbalah explains, that every single day since Ma'aseh Bereshis, the world has been working towards perfection without missing a single day. Everything's been working towards achdus, it's been unified on a spiritual level. Yet in the physical world, it seems to be just the opposite. How you can have the physical world, breaking apart and becoming less coherent and more destructive and more further away from Kosh Baruch Hu than ever before, yet in the core of the whole thing becoming solidified and connected and as close to Gula as possible before the final thing actually happens, is a stira meneu bay, which is hard to understand. But kacha, that's the way it is. Likewise, the same way. And by that Geula was experienced a large part as much of the fact the state was born immediately after that. And it's still here. And we certainly have built it up. And whatever people want to say about it, and whoever is responsible for it, technical details, right? We're focusing on the small picture and the petty stuff as opposed to the big picture, which is always a problem. Because that's what Mordechai was able to do. Mordechai was a big picture person, and in that big picture, that's where the freedom lies. And the moment a person can look at history from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's perspective, and here's the point, the moment he can make a Megillas Esther out of his own personal history, out of the history of the period he's living in, he can make it into Megillas Esther and by the way, it's an exercise to do with your kids, to do with yourself, to do with your Talmidim, right? You sit down and take a chunk of current history that looks scary, and you say to yourself, if you were God and you were trying to arrange this thing into a Gula type situation, right? What would you have to do? What would you have to do, right? And you'd be surprised what you do, right? You say to yourself, well, Ahmadinejad, there's a serious, Yimach Shmo, there's a serious threat to the Jewish people, right? He has to fall like Haman fell. So how could we arrange history right today that could result in that kind of a situation, right? Well, what would that have required 50, 60 years ago to put that into motion? And as you start creating a Megillus Esther out of current history, you begin to realize that those things are probably, in fact, what God has done. That's probably happened behind the scenes. Just like Obama getting into office all over again. There are things that have been set in motion 15, 25, when you weren't even looking, when you weren't even paying attention. That's how conspiracies work. As we said before, the greatest conspirator of all is the Kodesh Baruch Hu. No one runs a conspiracy better than Hashem does. He sets things up, he puts things in motion, but it's all for the good of Klal Yisrael. He's not trying to take advantage of his own personal gain and benefit. He's doing it for us. Because he is charged, so to speak, with the mission of bringing about the conclusion that we have to bring about without sacrificing our free will along the way. So therefore he's going to hide all kinds of details. But it doesn't mean that a person can't go looking for them. It doesn't mean the person shouldn't go looking for them. In fact, it's the opposite. Purim and Pesach say, you want to be free? You have to rise above the everyday mundane reality. In every generation, the Haggadah says, they come after us. In every generation, they come to get us, and we don't have the arms and the weapons. One of the scariest comments I've heard in the last little while did not come from Ahmadinejad, did not come from Obama. Guess where they came from?
From probably some Jew.
Which one?
Netanyahu or Perez or somebody, huh?
Bibi. Comes back from America on the eve of Purim and says, unlike previous generations, we have control of our destiny. We're in control over here. Moshe Dayan said the same thing, right? The exact same thing, and everything went downhill from that point, right? Don't bring us down to that level where the IDF is going to save us once again, or the Kippah HaBarzel is going to shoot down the missiles, or that the nuclear deterrent we have in our favor is going to. Don't go that route, because that never works in our favor. You want to save the Jewish people? Say, we have survived miraculously until this day against the most phenomenal threat, against countries that should have the bomb and don't have the bomb, against all logic, against all odds, and we're still here. So, ladies and gentlemen, why should we be here after this year as well? Somehow there's all, because someone's looking after us. And all that's taking place is just to bring out a fantastic conclusion for the sake of Klal Yisrael. That's where the freedom lies. That's what Purim comes to give over to us in advance of Pesach. The Haggadah is a Megillah. It's Megillus Esther, but it really came first. So the Megillah is really the Haggadah in reverse. You look at the Haggadah, it's the exact same thing. We start with, Ganuz, we put him down, but it's the exact same, Yogi started to point, even Paro looks like a fool in the end, just like Haman. But they weren't, they were real people. But if you can see them through the eyes of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, they look exactly like they are in the end. And the redemption of Kodesh Baruch Hu is just as well thought out, well planned, well set up, to the degree that you could see it from Hashem's perspective, you'd never worry again the rest of your life, you'd be untouched.
What do you mean by the Haggadah is Megillah in reverse?
No, not reverse. I was going to say that the Haggadah was like Megillus Esther, but it's actually the other way around, because the Haggadah came after, but the story of Pesach precedes Purim, right? Purim is really it's the other way around, but it's the same idea. The same idea, meaning that whatever the Haggadah comes to do, it's just really, the Megillah is just the predecessor to the Haggadah. It's the exact same thing, showing you history through Kodesh Baruch Hu's eyes and how we come out on top in the end, and we only don't when we don't believe in it. We fall prey to the outside way of thinking, the world's way of thinking, and see history based as being random, out of the hands of Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Jewish people are as much of a victim as anybody else, if not more so, and they ignore all those fantastic. Even Hitler himself said, when I look at the history of the Jewish people, I can't help but wonder. Here's an Amaleki, right? One of the most worst sworn enemy who's going to kill 6 million Jews in the end. Sits there and says, I can't help but wonder that maybe with all the survival until this very day, that maybe destiny has in fact chosen them out from the rest of the nations of the world. Maybe. I'll take one last shot just in case it's not true, but I do bear witness to that fact. Halavai, the Jews would say the same thing. Then Hitler's would never rise to power. Hamas would never rise to power. There's no powers in the end. We'd sojourn in Mitzrayim, go back there, it's Canaan. Everything would be the way it's supposed to be. But we, unfortunately, have to learn about Cherus, freedom, the hard way. We have to be forced and pushed to rise above the everyday mundane reality by being pushed out of it by the rest of the nations of the world. And therein lies the freedom of Pesach.